Hey everybody, my name is Scott Crossdeck and I'm one of the pastors on staff here at Church of the Resurrection, and I'm so excited to be with you today, to be present in confirmation. It means a lot to me that you're here, and confirmation is one of those really important journeys in my life of faith, and so my hope is that this is something that is speaking to you and informing you and helping you to grow in your relationship with Jesus. My job today is to talk about the Church of the Resurrection, who we are as a church, what is the church, and how God is calling us to live as a community of faith. And so as we talk about that, it's important for you to know that the Church of the Resurrection, we started in 1990 in a funeral home on State Line Road. Here's a picture of our first location, and you might recognize it. It's the McGilly Chapel. Every weekend when we first began, we'd have to set up and tear down space to make it suitable for worship services and for a whole bunch of new visitors, first-time visitors. So on Sunday mornings, there'd be a whole team of volunteers that would be moving empty caskets aside in order to make space for where Resurrection would be worshiping for the very first time. And that's, by the way, where Resurrection got its name, because what better name for a church that meets in a funeral home that really focuses in on death than to call this new community meeting in a funeral home Resurrection. It's a place that is known for life, a place where hope always wins. And so in any event, what we know about Resurrection, it began with the vision of a 25-year-old pastor who gathered in this funeral home. And he was at that time that he began this church just 10 to 12 years older than you are right now. Pastor Adam Hamilton, he had these bold dreams back then and a God-side vision for reaching non-religious and nominally religious people in southern Kansas City. He was particularly focused on connecting with people who were not already involved in a church. And so he wanted to create this place of thinking people where they could come and feel free to ask tough questions about life or ask tough questions about their faith without settling for easy answers. He wanted to create a space where people could meet Jesus, where they could grow in their faith together and also experience authentic Christian community that would be inviting and friendly and committed to changing the world by the grace of Jesus Christ, by how we live our life of faith out in the world. A lot has changed from those 1990 days since the funeral home. We no longer have to move caskets aside to set up and tear down each weekend for worship. Now we actually have not one locations, but we have 6 locations across the Kansas City metro. We have locations here in Leawood, where it all began. We have a location in Olathe, Kansas, and the west side of Johnson County. We have one in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. We have another location in Blue Springs, Missouri, and 2 more locations, one in Overland Park, Kansas, and another one in Brookside, which is a part of Kansas City, Missouri. And so we have all of these different locations now, as well as a bunch of people who continue to join us online each weekend or on TV. And some of you are joining us for confirmation online. Each one of our locations, these 6 locations, not including online, they look different and they feel different. They serve different areas of Kansas City with different sites and different buildings. But what binds us together, regardless of our differences, is our shared purpose. At Church of the Resurrection, our purpose is to build Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. That drives everything we do. Our purpose is how our church staff, how our lay leaders, our volunteers make every decision. Everything filters through our purpose. Everything we do, it must work to support our purpose. And our purpose is, once again, I want you to say it with me this time, our purpose is to build Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. Our purpose is what drives us, but where are we driving toward? Where are we going? And for that, it's important for you to know that our church, we have a shared vision, and that unites us as well. As we seek to build Christian community together, we have this shared vision and a prayer, really, that we will collectively be used by God to change lives, to strengthen churches, and ultimately to transform the world. This happens, we live into our vision of changing lives, strengthening churches, and transforming the world. This happens when we invite our friends, invite other people, our neighbors, our classmates, even our family. This happens when we invite people to join us on a journey of knowing, loving, and serving God. Or as I like to call it, a journey of head, heart, and hands. We want to invite people with their head, with their hearts, and with their hands to have an encounter with God. And this journey is what all of our ministries in the church seek to do. They seek to create these spaces and activities where people can invite their friends to grow, to know, to love, and to serve God. We cultivate a sense of God's love through worship and prayer. That's how we invite people to engage their heart. We grow to know and to understand, to learn more about who God is and who God is calling us to become when we read Scripture, or when we study together, or when we join in small groups, or in Sunday school classes, or especially in confirmation. In confirmation, we grow together to learn about who God is and who God is calling us to be as a way of confirming our faith. We grow in our service to God out in the community through mission trips, through different kinds of work with our partner schools, or any of the other outreach opportunities that we have that we offer as invitation points to get connected, to grow in our hands in our service of God. But all of this together, it's how we ultimately build Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. As we are in this journey with this vision, driven by our purpose, one of the things we recognize over the last 30 plus years is that Resurrection, in all of its locations, is now the largest church in Kansas City. It's also the largest United Methodist Church in the United States, and it is among, if not the most influential church in the mainline Christianity. This congregation now has more than 25,000 active members and more than 30,000 people, members and non-members. They worship every weekend in person, online, or at any one of our 6 locations across the Kansas City area. And so what we recognize is that this community has been building and growing from that very simple beginning in that funeral home with a vision of a 25-year-old pastor and this calling that God has placed on his life. But regardless of that growth, what has not changed over the years is the church's passion for helping people to connect with God, to grow in faith, and to serve as the hands and feet of Christ as we love and care for our neighbors in the community and throughout the world. We continue to be a place where people from all walks of life can find a church home where they're encouraged, where they belong, where they're welcome to explore and to ask questions and to develop relationships with God and also with one another. And I would say that as you gather here and as you grow to know more about who Resurrection is, there are several things that are going to begin to describe the people who are a part of this community for any duration of time. And from what I've discovered is that Resurrection people, they are hope radiating people. So the people that call Resurrection their home, they radiate with hope. We believe there's always hope. And as Pastor Adam shares regularly, especially on Easter weekend, we believe that the worst thing isn't the last thing. Meaning there's always a reason to carry forward in hope, because resurrection always triumphs. Life overcomes the grave, and hope overwhelms despair. The worst thing is never the last thing, and so we always have hope. We radiate hope. Resurrection people, they're also bridge builders. And so we aren't either or kinds of people. Either you're with me or against me. You don't hear people say that here. Instead, we are more like both and thinkers and doers. We like to build bridges between opposing sides of an argument, which means we strive to love our neighbors the same way we strive to love our enemies. We want to draw people together. We like to convene, or we like to build bridges. And so oftentimes what you're going to find about resurrection people is that they're quick to listen, and they're slow to speak, or we're slow to jump to conclusion. We always think the best of the other person. And so that's a way that we describe our propensity to long to build bridges. We hope to mend the polarized culture that we're living in. We are also, when you think about resurrection people, critical thinkers or thought-provoking. We're the kind of church full of the kind of people that don't like to check their brain at the door. We like to think things through critically. We like to wrestle with tough questions until we find God's blessing. And so we are thought-provoking in that kind of way. We don't settle for easy answers. Last thing I'd share with you about resurrection people is that we are outwardly focused, meaning we are always engaged outside of ourselves, seeking every opportunity possible to serve the community by loving our neighbors, by meeting the needs of the poor and the downtrodden, which means we are oftentimes found rolling up our sleeves and getting our hands dirty in the business of changing the world, or what I would say is putting our faith into action. The last thing I'd share about our church, not just those descriptions about our church people or who we are as a community of individuals, but this church also has 4 driving visions that have emerged over the last several years, and we define those as Vision 2030, but really what those visions are these God-sized dreams that we have as a whole church in all of our locations, that we have for people, but we also have for this community. These visions are narrated by describing closing the gap initiatives. And so why we call it closing the gap is that there's this idea of how the world should be, and then there's this understanding of how the world actually is. So there's the world as it should be, there's the world as it is, and what our hope is that we might close the gap in between the two. Or in other words, that we might build the kingdom of heaven here on earth, just as it is in heaven. And so with these 4 big visions, these 4 big buckets, we want to close the gap. We want to build the kingdom of heaven. And the first closing the gap vision we have is this idea that we might be used by God to close the spiritual gap. And what we recognize is that as time seems to march on, more and more people are falling away from organized religion, or in many instances, they're falling away from a belief in God altogether. One of our big visions is to change that. And so closing the spiritual gap has everything to do with inviting as many people possible to practice the Christian faith and to understand what it looks like to live a life like Christ by engaging in the 5 essential practices of the Christian life. These 5 practices, they are worship and prayer, they are study and scripture, they are to serve both corporately and individually, to give generously, and then to share, which is a way of saying we want to share our faith with other people. You're going to hear more about these 5 essential practices throughout confirmation, I'm sure, but we want to invite as many people to know these 5 habits or these 5 essential practices that will help us to become better or to strive to live the life of Christ. And so every one of our ministry areas in the church pays attention to these practices and builds them into our programs. And so I'm going to invite you, as you get engaged, to be on the lookout for those 5 essential practices as one of our visions to close the spiritual gap. Another vision that we have is that we long to close the justice and kindness gap. And this looks like engaging in works of justice and mercy out in the community. We long to, as a community, care for those who cannot care for themselves. We want to serve as a voice for the voiceless. We want to promote kindness and justice everywhere we go. There's different ways that you'll experience this vision and live into this vision. One of the ways is that every 2 years during the national elections, presidential elections and midterm elections, we engage in a citywide kindness campaign as a part of this Justice and Kindness Closing the Gap initiative. We want to help Republicans and Democrats, Trump supporters and Biden supporters. We want to help them come together to build bridges, to become friends, to see each other as companions, as opposed to treating each other like enemies. We want to create kindness campaigns that draw communities together to better reflect the kingdom of heaven. We also have in this Closing the Gap initiative these visions for racial justice. And we have a whole team of people that is focused on how do we live out this vision of racial justice here in Kansas City and beyond. And we have a great leader, Pastor Cheryl Jefferson Bell, who leads our community justice ministry for our whole church. And she is a voice for racial justice all throughout this city. This is an important thing that we're going to do to try to close the justice and kindness gap. We also are working on all sorts of matters related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, as well as other justice measures so that everybody in this city knows that they are welcome, that they are included, and that they belong in this church. And so this is a very important Closing the Gap initiative that involves other things than what I mentioned, including a lot of work around mental well-being, around suicide prevention, and homelessness too. Another Closing the Gap initiative that we have is one that is working to close the opportunity gap for children and families living in poverty. Now you might be thinking, what is the opportunity gap? This opportunity gap is the opportunity that presents itself to children and families in poverty. They don't have the same access to opportunity that people who are of means have. And so what we strive to do is to close that gap as well, so that everybody has the same opportunities to succeed as everybody else. This looks like providing medical care or dental care, or food to those who are food insecure, or educational resources to families and children who need them in our neighborhoods, around all of our partner schools, including our pre-K partners as well. We are always thinking up new ways to come alongside these families, and more importantly, their kids, in ways that will afford them opportunities to thrive and to flourish in life as an outpouring of our faith, as an outpouring of closing this gap that will allow us to experience the kingdom of heaven everywhere on earth, just as it is in heaven. Lastly, the thing that we long to close, maybe more than anything else, and this is what I'm most passionate about, is we long to close the generational gap. That is a way of saying we long to pour into these emerging generations so that our faith lasts for generations to come. We long to engage the next generation as they grow in the knowledge and love of God to change the world. We long to build out all of our spaces at all of our locations with our students in mind so that we can build spaces where students would feel welcome, included, where they can grow in their faith, where they can connect with each other, and they can fall in love with God who loves us unconditionally so that we might change the world on account of that love. We long for in every opportunity to find ways to encourage students to grow in their faith, to wrestle with tough questions, to focus on the love of Christ so that they might share it with others. Not just right now, but so that they might share it as the leaders of the next church or the church of the next generation. And I just want to say that's who you are. That's why we're here. That's why I'm speaking to you today, is because I know that God is working with you, that God called you, that God sees you, that God loves you just as you are. And what I know is that when God sees us and calls us and chooses us, He also equips us to do the very same thing that God does first for us, maybe even greater things, and that's to bear fruit, bear fruit that will last. And I believe that each and every one of you has the potential of God's grace to change the world. You have a capacity that God has given to you to do these extraordinary things, and my job is to cheer you on, to support you, to walk with you, to lead you, to mentor you, to do whatever I can to care for you as you grow in your faith, because you are going to be the person who carries this church going forward into the future. I began by talking about the church 30 years ago, but I want to end by dreaming about where the church is going to be 30 years from now. And what I know is that you are an essential part of that calling and that story, and I'm so excited to see where God leads you. So thank you for letting me be a part of this confirmation journey with you. Thank you for being a part of Church of the Resurrection, and I can't wait to see how God uses you to change the world, to bring the kingdom of heaven here on earth, just as it is in heaven.